I, 27, female, have a daughter with my ex-husband Boris, 33, male. Boris was, for the lack of better terms, an absolute nightmare to be married to. He was a leech, and I hate myself for not being able to see that when I first got together with him. When I first met him, he was working as a cashier at Target making minimum wage. I didn't really care about his income, and when we got to talking, I felt like we connected really well, which is why I even went out on a second date with him. During those initial days, he would only pay for his share of the food, which was fine with me, even though he would be the one asking me out constantly. When we started to get more and more comfortable with each other, he started opening up about how difficult his childhood had been since his drug-addicted dad ran away, leaving him and his mother to fend for themselves. I felt bad for the guy, and I wanted to see the best in him. He told me how he had always wanted to be a freelance artist but never had the opportunity to be one. In just 2 months of dating, we were infatuated and things moved quickly. He wanted to move in with me, telling me how he was in love with me and wanted to take this plunge. I knew it was a bit fast, but I had fallen in love with him and thought it would be just fine. After moving in, Boris then quit his job and started to look for freelance jobs to pursue his dream of becoming an artist. During this time, I wanted to support his dream, so I picked up the slack of rent and bills around the house. I was the only one working, while Boris would tell me how he was looking for opportunities. He did work a few jobs, but the client would always be dissatisfied with his work, so no one would hire him for the long term. Whatever he would earn, he would either send some dollars to his mother or quickly blow it off, which resulted in no savings. I started seeing how he would spend more and more time playing video games on the sofa while I would work my ass off the whole day. I would come home to a dirty house, which was aggravating. Whenever I would tell him to clean the place, he would tell me how he was tired after applying for jobs and that as his partner, I should be more understanding. Whenever I would see a now hiring sign with a link or QR code, I would send it to him asking him to apply, but he would give excuses like, "It's too far," or "They don't pay enough." He would mock me about how my life was so much easier and I could never understand his struggles, which was unnerving because he would literally do nothing around the house the whole day. I had met his mother once or twice and it had become quickly clear to me that she didn't like me. Hillary would tell me how I should stop pestering her son to look for a job when he is already trying his best. I would then tell her how she could then pay for his bills around the house, but this would make them really angry. Hillary would tell me how I should be ashamed of asking her for more money when she was a single parent. This was confusing to me because here I was supporting her adult son. Oddly enough, I started to notice that Boris's behavior towards me started to get more and more rude. He would frequently call me names and openly express a desire to be with other women or leave me over trivial matters whenever we would have a disagreement. The irony wasn't lost on me, despite being the primary breadwinner because of his meager monthly income. I was criticized for not fulfilling traditional gender roles to his satisfaction, like cooking and cleaning to his standards. He would tell me how the dishes weren't washed properly, or the kitchen floor wasn't cleaned. The thing was that I was doing everything with zero help from him, and it was difficult for me to keep up with the increasing load of work, both at my work and at home. Boris would also withdraw a lot of money from our savings account to buy unnecessary things. I say our joint account, when in reality it was just my money. Whenever I would talk about limiting our spending and saving up, he would get angry and tell me how I was trying to control him. My savings had been quickly depleting because I was single-handedly supporting our lifestyle while he did nothing to contribute. He would also say how I was nagging him to get a job, but would actually do nothing to get one. I was at my wit's end and didn't know what to do. By this time, my entire family already knew that he was a leech, and my parents would urge me to leave him as soon as possible. My older sister already had a plan and had told me to leave him behind and shift with her for a few months so I could start saving some money. Although I was a bit conflicted since I loved him, I was slowly starting to see that this wasn't what I wanted. But then, as if things couldn't get any worse, I got pregnant. I didn't tell Boris anything because I knew he would blow up at me. This was not planned, and I was so conflicted about what to do, but all my hesitation went right out the window when I heard my little one's heartbeat. At that moment, I made up my mind that I would keep the baby and give my daughter everything that she deserved. When I broke the news to Boris, he was pissed and started shouting about how having a baby was going to ruin our lives and how this was not the right time. I told him that he was welcome to leave and I was completely fine raising the baby on my own. He then decided to call up his mother to complain about how I was choosing a baby over him and how I had probably used him for all these months for his sperm. This was laughable, but his mother joined in with him to yell at me about how I was irresponsible enough to get pregnant without being married at least. Their shouting and accusations reduced me to tears since I was already feeling vulnerable, so I locked myself in my room to call up my parents and give them the news. Although my parents were a bit sad that the father was Boris, they were also happy since this was going to be their first grandchild. My sister has never wanted to have a child and has been quite open about this decision, so everyone was quite excited about my daughter. My parents told me that they were coming over the next day to talk to me so we could make a decision and sort this out. When they met Boris the next day, my dad firmly told him that we didn't need him in our lives and that they wanted me to go and live with them so they could take care of me. He told me how he could continue to live in this house on his own and pay the rent. Hearing this, I watched Boris's eyes widen up in shock, saying how this was his child as much as mine, so as the father it was his duty to provide. He told my parents how he had been thinking since last night and that he was going to step up and start becoming a good partner to me. This was quite a shock for me to hear, since he had never spoken this way. Yet the steely determination in his eyes and my love for him made me falter. To be honest, I never would have wanted to leave if he had his own job and provided around the house. His words made me change my mind, and I decided to stay as long as he promised to get a job as soon as possible. My parents warned him that they were going to keep a close eye on this situation. Boris, to his credit, did find a job soon after, although he would grumble about how unhappy he was to go back to work and would always be in a bad mood after work. I was happy that he was at least trying. During this time, I started noticing how his family members would always reach out to him for help. And when I say help, I mean it in a financial way. It was mostly his mom who would ask him to send some money with excuses like her kitchen sink wasn't working or her refrigerator was too old. One of his cousins would also reach out sometimes when he was behind paying his car's monthly payment, or if they needed a few $100s to get the car fixed. As you can imagine, the list goes on and on. What would really frustrate me was that Boris would never tell them no, which would mean I would then have to cover for him when it came to rent or bills. These ungrateful family members would also expect Boris to give them expensive birthday gifts and would get pissed if we didn't. I decided to put my foot down after one such occasion and refused to cover for Boris for his monthly car repayment to teach him a lesson. It was exhausting, but he finally learned and stopped lending people money. The only person who would continue to ask was his mother. When we managed to save up a bit of money in our accounts and I saw that he was consistently bringing in a salary every month, we decided that the next step would be to get married before the baby came. We couldn't afford any grand ceremony because We still had to think of the baby, so we had a small wedding at our local church, which my dad paid for. Throughout the ceremony, Hillary was complaining about how the venue was too small or how my dress was too modern for a bride. She was also telling everybody, high and near, about how unhappy she was that I had got pregnant before marriage and that it wasn't right. When some of my family members heard this conversation, they immediately came to defend me, saying that she should be blaming her son instead of me. This resulted in a commotion, and my dad asked her to get out. Boris tried to interject, but my dad was firm. Hillary walked out of the ceremony red-faced, clearly humiliated. I knew she wasn't going to let it slide this easily, and as expected, she did send me a long message accusing me of trying to take her son away from her and how I was going to be the worst mother ever. When I showed the message to Boris, hoping for some support so he could shut her down, he just shrugged and told me how I should not have let my dad kick her out and that what we did was wrong anyway. Of course, we had an argument regarding this, but I decided to let this go since I didn't want our marriage to start with the wrong foot. His mother would continue to harass me whenever she could, but for the most part, I learned to ignore her as much as I could. The days leading up to the delivery of my daughter were really hectic for me. Boris did nothing to help me and had started to come home really, really late. The day I went into labor, he didn't even pick up my calls. I had to call my parents and they immediately came to drive me to the nearest hospital. My mother stayed with me in the delivery room while my dad waited for me outside. Throughout all this, my dad tried to get in touch with Boris, but he was nowhere to be found. Hours later, he turned up at the hospital and gave excuses about how he was busy and had not checked his phone. I was so pissed at him for missing the birth of our daughter that I just started to scream at him. I told him how he knew this was my delivery date and I had informed him as well before he went to the office. But he knowingly chose to ignore my calls. Boris started justifying how I was the mother anyway, so I didn't really need him, and how my parents were there for me, so I should not be angry at him. He started to say how I was always being overdramatic and that this was why he didn't want a child with me, since my daughter would turn out this way. Hearing his words, I saw red. I wanted to leap out of my bed just to slap him across his face. I couldn't believe how he was talking about my daughter. I yelled at him to get out as I couldn't stand to see his face, and he did. My parents rushed into my room after they heard me yelling. I noticed my dad walked out with Boris, perhaps to talk with him. My mom comforted me and urged me to rest. When it was time for me to get discharged, my dad informed me that there was no way that he could let me move back in with Boris since he would never be able to take care of me and wanted me to live with them for a few days, so I agreed. I gave my house keys to Dad so he could go and pick up a few of my things, which is how he discovered Boris sitting in his pajamas playing video games in the living room. My dad questioned my husband about why he was not at work and if he had taken leave that day. But this is when Boris finally cracked and told the truth. It turns out that Boris had been let go from his job for the past 3 months. He had been spending his days at his cousin's place drinking or playing video games, which is why he missed my calls that day. When my dad questioned him about why he wasn't finding another job, Boris told him how he would do so, but for now, we had enough savings left. This was completely unacceptable since the savings we had belonged to me as well, and we needed it to take care of our baby, Emma. Instead of thinking about Emma, Boris was back to his old ways. My dad packed all my things and left. When I was informed about all this, I lost my head. I was already pissed at him, but knowing how he wanted to use me yet again, I was completely at my wit's end. My parents firmly told me that it was time for me to get a divorce from this man, otherwise he would continue to take advantage of me. They emphasized that my and Emma's well-being and financial stability were crucial, especially considering the irresponsible and disrespectful behavior he had displayed towards us. As much as I had been in love with him, I was also utterly embarrassed to realize that the wreck of the man I had married was a leech and a failure in his life. He would sink me, along with his miseries, if I didn't leave him now. I decided to take control of my life before it was too late. With the support of my parents, I consulted with a divorce lawyer to understand my options and rights in ending this tumultuous marriage. The more I delved into the legalities, the more I realized the extent of the financial mess he had left me in. I had accumulated credit card debts and very few savings were left. The only good thing was that even though my parents were well settled, I had nothing to my name yet, which meant he could not ask me for anything. I just wanted to get rid of him and didn't care about any alimony. I would have also let him go for child support, but my lawyer argued that as a father, he would be responsible for the child regardless of what I wanted. In the end, when I finally served Boris with divorce papers, he was flabbergasted. He pleaded with me a lot about not leaving him and started saying how marriage is about being for each other during difficult times. But I was honestly done. I asked him to sign the papers, otherwise I would change my mind and force him to pay me alimony, which I knew he could not afford to do. Hillary did try to reach out to me, accusing me of using her son and leaving him. Her last words to me were how she would make sure that her son marries a woman better looking and richer than me, and how I never deserve him anyway. I laughed, reading her words, and didn't even bother sending her a reply and just blocked her. The divorce proceedings went without any undue incidents, and as expected, Boris was required to pay child support every month. I was given full custody of the child, and Boris never even fought the decision. When we were finally divorced, I felt free and light. It had been ages since I had felt this way. This period of my life was quite challenging since I was freshly divorced while taking care of a newborn, but with the unwavering support of my parents, I began to slowly reclaim my life. It has been 4 years since our divorce, and Emma has grown up to be an adorable baby. Over the years, my ex-husband did offer a few apologies here and there, and we remained in touch for the sake of Emma. He would wish her on her birthdays and would ask for her pictures telling me how he missed her. Despite how our relationship had ended, I did want Emma to one day have a good relationship with Boris, so for her sake, I would be polite to him, but nothing more. I have been dating Dax for the past year, and he has been a wonderful partner to me. Although I am still hesitant about letting him into Emma's life, I do see Dax in my future. Unlike Boris, Dax is the complete opposite. He always stays true to his word and works in IT, so he earns well just like me. We both share our love for pottery, which is how we met in pottery class in the first place. He knew about my past and disliked Boris just like my parents did for what he had put me through. 3 months ago, I'd heard from the grapevine that Boris had got engaged. This was a surprise for me, but I was quite happy for him. Apparently, he met this mystery woman just a month ago, but they were quite serious with each other. Just weeks later, I received an invitation card in my mail. To my shock, it was from Boris and his new fiancée. He sent me a message saying how he would love for me, my parents, and Emma to attend his wedding. Although I was a bit hesitant, I was also curious to meet him and his wife after all these years. I knew that this would be a good step forward for the sake of Emma, so I agreed. The wedding went smoothly, and I could see how happy and beaming his wife was. She looked much younger than him, but I guess age doesn't matter when you are in love, right? One thing I did find a bit odd was that her side of the family was missing. There were no parents, siblings, or even friends who were present for her. During the celebratory reception of his newfound marital bliss, Boris came up to my table where I was sitting with my parents and Emma to introduce his bride, Nina. We talked for a while, and he even invited Emma to visit their new place so they could spend some time together. Nina seemed to be really sweet and was very welcoming. I felt good about them, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. During the reception, I had to go pee, so I walked in search of the venue restrooms. Just as I was about to turn a corner, I overheard my ex-husband talking with his mother-in-law. I had not seen mother-in-law for so long, and I still disliked her for how she meddled in our divorce. But I wanted to move on from all this, and Boris seemed to have changed, so I thought I would meet up with mother-in-law and have a quick word with her, where hopefully she would have forgiven me also. As I walked up to them, I heard them talking excitedly about how they had finally caught a big fish. Boris was saying how he couldn't believe that she had married him so fast, and that now he could live his life without ever worrying about money. Ex-mother-in-law seemed to be whispering to him about how he needed to secure the house, and Boris kept nodding. His admission that he had married her for financial gain and intended to exploit her assets left me petrified. I didn't want them to think I was eavesdropping, so I cleared my throat loudly, and they looked back in shock. When Boris realized it was just me and not his bride who had overheard their conversation, he relaxed. Although I didn't want to be nosy, I couldn't shake off what I had just heard, so I decided to directly confront him. I asked him if he had really married her just for the money, and if what I just heard was true. Boris and Hillary looked at me sheepishly, and Boris started saying how this was none of my business and I should not be meddling in their business. I scoffed and told him how I had genuinely thought he had changed after all these years, but it seemed like he was still a leech. Hillary smirked and said that I was just jealous of them, since now Boris would be much richer than me and I couldn't stand to see him so happy. I shook my head in disbelief at her remark. Boris then told me how Nina was the only child of this rich family, and although he did love her, he also loved what she could provide him with, which wasn't wrong, since now he was her husband and deserved to have a good life. I was shocked by how shameless he could be and openly admit his plan. I wanted nothing to do with this, so I told Boris that what he was planning was utterly vile, and I thought, after all these years, he would have turned a new leaf, but here he was back in his old ways. Boris didn't really care as usual, so I walked back to my table and told my parents that we were leaving. They looked a bit taken aback, but didn't question me. We gathered our things and left with Emma. When we returned home, I told my parents about my conversation with Boris, and they were taken aback just like me. My mom urged me to talk to Nina about this, since as women we should have each other's back. But I was afraid that Nina wouldn't believe me, so I hoped that Nina would see through Boris's lies on her own. I thought I would never have to see Boris or his new wife ever again. Just a few months later, Emma's birthday was coming up. I decided to invite all my family and friends, but I never sent any invitation to Boris. After our last conversation, I didn't want to be anywhere near him. My daughter's birthday party seemed to be going well when suddenly my ex-husband, accompanied by his new wife, made an appearance. I was shocked to see them since I had not invited them, and I looked at Dax, who was looking at them curiously. Emma was happy to see her dad and ran up to him in excitement. Boris gave her a huge hug and gave her a present. Nina smiled and wished my daughter a happy birthday. Although I was happy for my daughter, I was furious at Boris for coming to our party uninvited. He walked up to me to say how he had heard from our mutual friends about the party and just wanted to be here for a few minutes to give Emma her present. I didn't want to make a scene, so I just nodded and told him he could just stay for the rest of the night if he wanted, since my daughter looked happy. And I guess that is all that mattered to me. Boris introduced himself to Dax and they shook hands politely. Later, me and my mom were in the kitchen getting some casseroles when Nina walked in, asking us if she could help us with anything. She seemed like such a sweet and genuine girl. She helped us set the table for everyone and was helpful throughout the evening. I don't know why, but I felt guilty whenever we were interacting and Boris's plan kept getting in my head. In a fleeting moment of weakness while I was alone with her, I decided to tell her what my ex-husband had told me. I thought she would be grateful or concerned. Instead, she erupted in anger. She loudly started accusing me of being jealous of her and Boris's relationship, which made everyone stop what they were doing and stare at us. Nina started yelling if I was truly such a vile person that I couldn't see Boris be happy after what I had put him through. I looked at her confused as she continued to yell. Boris came up to her to comfort her while looking at me furiously for exposing his intentions. My parents tried to support me and tell Nina about what I had heard, but this only made her more upset. Boris announced that they were leaving because I was making his wife uncomfortable. In front of everyone, they left while I was left standing as a crazy ex-wife who probably was trying to ruin her ex-husband's marriage. I was embarrassed, but to be honest, I knew deep down that I had done the right thing. At least now my conscience was clear. Unfortunately, people did blame me for ruining my daughter's birthday, but my parents assured me that what I had done was right, and we hoped that Nina would see the truth. Just 2 weeks later, there was a knock on my door. Emma was at school, and my parents were out grocery shopping, so I was alone. I opened the door to find Nina in tears. She was shaking and crying uncontrollably. I asked her if something was the matter, but she kept muttering how she was ruined. I whisked her inside so she could sit on the sofa while I went to fetch her a drink so she could calm down. I waited for her to speak, worried about what had happened to her. Nina then started recounting how I was right and Boris had wiped their joint account clean. She had never realized this, but after what I had told her, she decided to check and found that he had been doing this for a long time. He had also cleverly made sure he had been added to her house deed, so now he would have 50% of the property. When she finally decided to confront him, he admitted to everything and told her that there was nothing that she could do now, since she had willingly added his name to the house deed and made a joint account. She kept crying about how she was a fool for not seeing this sooner and how she needed to sue him so he couldn't just get away with this. She told me how when she first got together with Boris, he told her that I was a gold digger and had tried to take his money, which is why she had accused me like that at the party. But now she was realizing that he might have made up those things as well. I nodded and told her how Boris had made my life hell all those years ago and how he and his greedy mother would constantly depend on my money to maintain their lifestyle. Nina apologized again and started to beg me to help her by suing Boris. She told me how we needed to teach Boris a lesson so that he could never do this with someone else. I told Nina that I would think about it and let her know. The reason I'm hesitating is because I don't want to be involved in a courtroom drama again with Boris. Those years of divorce have traumatized me and I don't know if I'm strong enough to handle it again. Will I be the a-hole if I don't help Nina sue Boris? Update 1. Okay guys, I hear you. When I posted this, I never imagined that there would be hundreds of comments to my post. I see that a majority of you think I am an a-hole for not deciding to help out Nina, but what you all don't understand is when I told Nina no, I was also thinking of what was right for Emma. I didn't want to jeopardize her happiness and stability. She has been happy reconnecting with her father, but I guess you are all right. I should keep her away from her father knowing what I know about him. I think I have always felt guilty about Emma not having a dad, and I had genuinely thought Boris had changed after our divorce, but I will definitely try to be a better parent and keep her away from him from now on. I will reach out to Nina and talk to her. Update 2. Hi everyone, it's been 4 months since I posted. First things first, Dax asked me to move in with him, which is such a huge deal. I was hesitant at first because I didn't know if Emma would like that, but it turns out that she loves Dax as much as I do. My parents helped us move in. I have never been this happy in my life. Dax is such a sweetheart and takes care of Emma like his own. Now, coming to the main update, I did decide to help out Nina. She and her family hired the best lawyer to sue Boris for every cent he had stolen and for the house deed. All I had to do was meet with her lawyers and testify against Boris. It was nerve-wracking to be back in court again, but I knew this was the right thing to do. I want to set a good example for my daughter, so I decided to be brave and tell the truth. Boris did end up losing the case and had to pay back all the money he had siphoned off. Nina was able to save her house without having to pay Boris any alimony. Over the course of this divorce, Nina and I have become good friends. She has apologized to me several times for what she has done in the past, and I am honestly over it. I'm just glad that because of Nina's actions, Boris has been publicly humiliated since everyone has found out about her case, and they have shunned him and his mother. I hope Hillary realizes what a shitty son she has raised and is ashamed of herself. Update 3. Hi everyone. It's been almost 8 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some positive news. Life has been treating me well, and I've been focusing on building a better future for myself and Emma. Dax has been a wonderful partner, and I appreciate the support and stability he brings to our lives. Unlike Boris, Dax is an equal partner to me, and even does all the house chores without me ever having to remind him. Emma is doing great too. She's growing up to be a smart and happy kid surrounded by love and positivity. I've made it priority to provide her with a nurturing environment, and seeing her thrive brings me immense joy. As for Boris and his family, I've not talked with any of them. After the revelations about Boris's true intentions in his new marriage, I realized that maintaining any connection with him is not in the best interest of my well-being or Emma's. I did talk to my daughter and told her as little information as I could about why her dad and I broke up. I don't want to influence her decision in any way, yet I feel like she deserves to know the truth. I feel like it's a step towards ensuring a healthier and happier life for both of us. I appreciate all the support and advice from this community. It has been invaluable in helping me navigate through challenging times. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.